Okay, what if literally everything you've ever been told about success is just completely backward? Look, from the time we're kids, we're taught that the absolute loudest voice in the room is the one that wins. The bold, the highly social, the alpha. Those are supposedly the people who get the big promotions, build the massive empires, and change the world. But today, in this explainer, we're diving into a hidden biological superpower. We're going to explore why being quiet isn't a weakness, it's not a flaw, and it's definitely not something you need to fix. Actually, if you've ever been told to, speak up more, or if you've ever felt like you just don't quite fit into this incredibly loud, fast-paced world, you are going to absolutely love what we uncover today. Picture this. Imagine two completely different people walking into a high-stakes networking room. Right off the bat, you've got the loud talker. And we all know the type, right? They're commanding the room, instantly shaking hands, projecting their voice over absolutely everyone else, and just effortlessly becoming the center of attention. They generate a lot of noise. Now shift your focus to the second person, the quiet observer. While the loud talker is busy working the room, the quiet observer is sitting slightly off to the side, quietly gathering data. They are listening super carefully, absorbing all the little dynamics of the room, and really only speaking when they have something incredibly meaningful to add. Society tells us the loud talker automatically wins. We've been wired to reward those loud voices in classrooms and boardrooms. But when you really dig into the data, history shows us the quiet observer is actually often the one building the greatest, most enduring success. So, for over a century now, we've basically lived in a culture totally driven by what's called the extrovert ideal. It's this deeply ingrained belief that the perfect person is highly social, incredibly gregarious, and just 100% comfortable in the spotlight. Think about how our modern world is actually built. Classrooms are literally designed with grouped desks to force constant collaboration. Modern workspaces? They're totally dominated by open-plan offices that practically beg for constant chatter and interruptions. We live in a society that just constantly rewards the loudest voices and completely mistakes noise for competence. But what if that whole idea is entirely backward? What if the real secret to modern success, true innovation, and immense wealth is actually found in silence? Well, here's where it gets super interesting. The real difference between an introvert and an extrovert, it isn't actually about confidence. And it definitely isn't about being shy or having some intense fear of people. It all boils down to brain chemistry. Introverts aren't just naturally quiet. Their brains literally run on a completely different chemical called acetylcholine. Now, while other brain chemicals are busy pushing us to seek thrills, excitement, and external social validation, acetylcholine is linked directly to our rest and digest system. Think of it as a deeply calming, built-in reward system. It makes us feel incredibly good when we turn inward, focus deeply, read a great book, or just sit and solve complex problems in total peace. So basically, extroverts and introverts are processing the world through entirely different neural highways. Extroverts, they're riding this short, rapid dopamine highway. It's like a really loud, high-speed roller coaster. They quite literally need the thrill of a massive crowd, a loud party, or big external social risks just to feel energized and, well, normal. Introverts, on the flip side, are traveling on a much more complex, winding acetylcholine highway. Think of this one like a scenic, deeply rewarding hiking trail. Because this neural pathway is physically longer, introverts are literally thinking more and processing way deeper before they even open their mouths to speak. They don't need a huge crowd to feel alive. Instead, they completely thrive in quiet, highly focused environments where their minds have the space to wander and just build amazing things. And because of this longer neural pathway, introverts come equipped with some seriously cool hidden hardware. They're practically physically wired for a completely different kind of greatness. First off, they naturally run on a super high baseline of internal alertness. That's exactly why noisy, chaotic environments tire them out so fast. Their brains are already wide awake. But this also gives them incredible real-life superpowers. Their right anterior insula acts kind of like a high-definition camera, automatically catching micro-expressions and tiny visual details that extroverts completely breeze past. Their amygdala operates as a highly sensitive emotional radar. And their prefrontal cortex, it heavily evaluates risks before they ever take action, meaning they almost never act impulsively or recklessly. They are quietly, constantly calculating every single move. Now, have you ever actually wondered how someone manages to sit alone for 10,000 hours to master coding or writing or investing? You've probably heard of the famous 10,000-hour rule, right? The idea that it takes roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate, intense practice to hit true mastery in literally any field. Well, introverts have a massive, almost unfair advantage right here. The introvert's natural tolerance for solitude is the secret engine behind world-class mastery.
Because while an extrovert might find prolonged isolation totally draining, they might abandon a project just to go hang out and socialize. An introvert finds that exact same solitude incredibly liberating. They actually enjoy those quiet, lonely hours that are absolutely required to become truly great at something.
And this exact biological advantage leads us directly to what experts call deep work. Deep work is that incredibly rare ability to sit quietly and focus entirely without distraction on tough, cognitively demanding tasks. The formula is pretty straightforward. You find a quiet, distraction-free space, completely disconnect from social media and all those shallow everyday tasks, and engage in uninterrupted cognitive work. This is exactly how the modern world gets shaped, by the way. I mean, Steve Wozniak didn't invent the very first Apple computer in some loud, chaotic brainstorming session. No way. He built it entirely alone, in the quiet of a tiny Hewlett-Packard cubicle, deliberately arriving early and staying super late just to avoid everyone else's distractions. In our modern world that is just filled with endless pinging notifications, the ability to do deep work like that is arguably the absolute most valuable skill you could possibly possess.
So, if we look at the day-to-day lifestyle of an introvert, it is highly, highly strategic. Just think about how utterly exhausting it is to constantly chase likes on social media or try to maintain hundreds of super shallow acquaintances. Introverts, they basically skip all of that. Instead, they choose to curate deeply loyal, high-quality friendships. They totally ignore all the exhausting social media showboating. They kind of walk through life like a quiet detective, just completely observant of everything happening around them. Honestly, they usually know the true motivations of everyone in the room just because they are quietly watching. And because they spend so much time reflecting inward, they develop this profound emotional self-awareness. They know their strengths, they freely acknowledge their weaknesses, and they are incredibly happy and productive just hanging out in their own company. And hey, make no mistake here, this intense level of focus and this strategic lifestyle, it pays off financially in a really massive way. Let's look at Bill Gates, a famously proud introvert. He didn't build his incredible, life-changing wealth by hitting up networking parties every night. No, he famously practiced what he called think weeks, where he would completely isolate himself in a secret cabin in the woods for an entire week with literally nothing but books and papers. He leveraged those quiet, reading-intensive habits to think deeply about the future of technology, which eventually led to him building Microsoft and achieving a net worth that famously crossed the $80 billion mark. The sheer ability to delay immediate gratification so you can focus on an isolated long-term vision, that is a massive, unmatched financial superpower.
There's this fantastic quote from Robert Kiyosaki where he notes that true wealth isn't actually about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep. And man, this philosophy perfectly captures the financial edge that introverts have. Remember that prefrontal cortex we talked about earlier? Because their brains deeply evaluate risks there, introverts have incredible emotional control when it comes to investing. They don't just jump on the latest hyped-up meme stock or trend. They don't panic sell during sudden market crashes because their prefrontal cortex naturally steps in to override that impulsive panic. They effortlessly delay immediate gratification. So while a lot of other people are busy spending all their money just to maintain a loud, socially attractive image, introverts are quietly saving, making incredibly calculated, long-term choices, and basically building generational wealth in the background.
This stark contrast between these two approaches actually shapes the entire business world. When you look at investing, introverts rely on calculated risks rather than the impulsive herd mentality you often see in extroverts. In networking, an extrovert might frantically run around collecting 50 business cards that ultimately lead absolutely nowhere, while an introvert will literally just have two deeply meaningful conversations that lead to lifelong, highly profitable partnerships. And when it comes to team leadership, the findings here are super fascinating. Research out of Wharton actually proves that introverts make superior leaders for proactive teams. Why is that? Simply put, because they don't have this giant ego that constantly needs feeding. They don't feel the need to dominate every single conversation. And because of that, they give their team the absolute psychological safety needed to bring forward their best, most innovative ideas.
Which brings us right to communication. And honestly, this is one of my absolute favorite psychological insights. You know, the loudest person in the meeting room, a lot of the time, they are really just listening to reply. They aren't genuinely hearing what you're saying. They're basically just holding their breath, waiting for their turn to speak again so they can dominate the space. But the quiet introvert, they are listening to understand. They're sitting there actively absorbing patterns. They're reading the room, shifting emotions. They're picking up on all those little unspoken facts that everyone else just completely glossed over. So by the time they finally do decide to speak up, they've already gathered the exact precise information needed to actually solve the problem at hand, rather than just adding more useless noise to the room.
Seriously, when you look back at the people who've profoundly impacted humanity, a very clear pattern starts to emerge. Isaac Newton, he unlocked the laws of gravity and invented calculus while totally isolated during the plague. Albert Einstein conducted his greatest mind-bending thought experiments and completely revolutionized theoretical physics in pure, absolute solitude. Warren Buffett amassed a historic, legendary fortune by sitting in a quiet office in Omaha, just reading financial reports miles and miles away from the screaming traders on Wall Street. And Emma McKeon became one of the greatest Olympic swimmers ever as a famously quiet achiever, just brutally outworking everyone in the pure silence of the pool. None of these titans conquered the world by being the loudest in the room. They changed the world by completely dedicating themselves to their craft in complete silence. If there is one single most important takeaway I want you to get from this explainer today, the one thing you should remember above all else, it's this. Success isn't about being loud, and it certainly isn't about constantly seeking attention. It is entirely, 100% about the real value you quietly create. Look, we live in a society that is absolutely obsessed with loud notifications, highly produced viral videos, and pointless shouting matches. And sure, that noise might get the immediate fleeting attention, but the actual value, the brilliant books, the groundbreaking lines of code, the timeless pieces of art, the generational wealth, all of that is built in silence. Success doesn't always shout. Actually, most of the time, it whispers. So I want to leave you with this final, powerful thought to really reflect on today. In a society that is just completely addicted to noise, constant notifications, and endless, exhausting chatter, your absolute greatest competitive advantage is your ability to tune it all out. Your ability to embrace solitude isn't weird, it is a literal, biological superpower. So the only real question left to ask yourself is this. In a world obsessed with noise, what will you build in the silence? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.